La ilaha illallah.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to our next segment of the first International God Summit. In today's program, we will be discussing a very important topic, which is experiencing God and witnessing the signs of His existence and the manifestation of His blessings through the institution of Khilafat Ahmadiyya. And for today's discussion, we are joined by respected Abid Waheed Khan Sahib, who is currently serving as the International Press Secretary of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community. Abid Khan Sahib, Assalamu alaikum and Jazakallah for joining us here in the studio.
Wa alaikum salam, Jazakallah, it's a pleasure.
Abid Sahib, as Ahmadis, we are truly blessed to have leadership in the form of Khilafat Ahmadiyya. And amongst the countless blessings that are associated with Khilafat Ahmadiyya, one is that Hazrat Mirza calls us towards, not only does he call us towards God, but through his every action and deed and words, he truly exemplifies absolute reliance, trust, belief, and conviction in Allah the Almighty.
Yeah.
You've had the blessed opportunity for over the years to serve Khilafat very closely. You've traveled to various Jamaats across the world as well and met many Ahmadis. Could you share some of your experiences in relation to this?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different types of experiences which are extremely faith-inspiring, which show you the majesty, the wisdom, the knowledge of Khilafat. And the thing that you see above all on the various tours of Hazur is that unique bond of love, which we all talk about, but when you see Hazur traveling or meeting, you actually see it, the practical manifestation of it. Genuinely, in every sphere, Hazur is the person who cares for the members of the Jamaat more than even their parents can care. And to an outsider, this might sound like words, but when you actually practically live it, when you see it, when you feel it yourself, and you see so many people of different races all united at that one hand, and how Hazur is going from country to country, trying to spread that message of Islam, but also to develop that bond of unity and brotherhood within the Jamaat, and how he feels the pain, and how he gives relief and reassurance to so many people across the world, irrespective of their races, nationalities, or backgrounds. It's incredible.
Jazakallah, Abid Sahib. One of the things is that we often hear stories from many Ahmadis, and everyone can relate to that, is that sometimes you're suffering from a particular personal worry, an illness.
Yeah.
For many years, people have been trying all kinds of means to come up with a solution to those problems. And the moment they've had the opportunity to meet Hazur or to write to Hazur, against all odds, miraculously, those prayers have been answered. Could you just share some accounts in relation to that?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is something that I've had personal experience of. I'm sure so many MDs, in fact, I know so many MDs have felt this and seen this. And this, whether it's through their letters, through their mulaqats, how they have been blessed through the prayers of Hazur. I remember once in Australia, I was Hazur went there in 2013, and most days Hazur's routine would be that in the mornings and evenings he would have sessions of mulaqats, and often I would try to catch people who had just had their mulaqats just to see how they were and what their experiences were like. There was one person I didn't actually catch myself or didn't get a chance to speak to, but the next day he sought me out himself. He was a young Khadim. He'd moved from Pakistan a few years before. And he said that I wanted to tell you my experience of mulaqat and my family's experience. And he mentioned that he and his wife had a child who was about 2 years old. And it was okay, but it had, ever since it was born, it had been unable to digest milk, which obviously for any parent, especially of young children, knows that this is their main source of nourishment. And so the parents were very, very worried. They discussed it with doctors, and the wife herself was a doctor, and she tried various means to try and find some way that the child could digest it, because he wasn't growing at the rate he should be. and obviously moving forward, it was going to cause some other development issues. So they were very, very tense and upset and worried. And he told me that every single possible remedy or means, whatever there had been, he said they'd tried it. Every time they gave this child anything milk-like or milk, he would automatically throw it up. So their last resort, of course, was the prayers of Khilafat al-Masih. And they had mulaqat, and he told me that yesterday we went for mulaqat and we took a jar of honey and we told Hazur about our baby's ailment, and we requested that Hazur please pray for this child. And he said that at that moment Hazur took his finger, took a small amount of the honey and placed it into the baby's mouth, and Hazur said Allah fazal karega, that everything will be fine. And obviously they had that immediate happiness and reassurance that they had Hazur's prayers, especially that Hazur had said with such confidence that everything will be okay. He told me that as soon as the mulaqat ended, his wife took the baby and started to feed it milk. And he said we were like an audience crowded around the baby, mother and father, waiting. When is the child going to regurgitate the milk, as he routinely does? He said 2 minutes passed, 5 minutes passed, 10 minutes passed. And he said that genuinely we were in a state of astonishment. That how is this possible? 2 years every single time. When they requested Huzur's prayers, they weren't expecting something so instantaneous. They were hoping for something longer term, that over time the child will develop. And they said it was a true miracle. And so they went home and they still waited. She fed him again. And he said that over the course of the 24 hours, 3 or 4 times the child has been fed, and without any problem whatsoever. And by this time, as he was telling me the story, he had tears in his eyes, as I'm sure any parent can relate, that they could now see the future for their child, a blessed future, a lucky future, a good future. And I stayed in touch with him for some time afterwards, and I always used to ask, how is the child? And they were saying, absolutely fine. Since that day, we've never had a single problem. That's just one incident. There's many others. I recall a few years ago, I was in the Fazl Mosque when Hazur used to reside there. And there was an elderly gentleman. I would see him every day around namaz time. He would be sweeping around the courtyard, but I never had any interaction with him. I didn't know him. And one day, it was Jalsa days, and I was there taking notes of, again, some people's mulaqats and some meetings that Hazur was having. And one day he came running quite furiously towards me. And he said, and he was speaking Punjabi, and I'm not the most fluent in Punjabi, but I could understand what he was saying. And straight away I could tell that this was a person who wasn't educated in worldly ways, in terms of literacy, these type of things. But I could also see that there was something in him that he had a very special and firm attachment to Khilafat, and that was visible within a few moments of meeting him, the way he was speaking. And then he said to me, he said, I've got something to tell you, which is a personal story. And this is why I know that Khilafat is true. And this is why I know that Allah Ta'ala answers the prayers of the Khalifa. And he mentioned that some years before, he and his wife had been blessed with a baby child, a daughter. But when she came out, her hand was clenched like this in a fist, and it wouldn't open. And so obviously the doctors and stuff, they were consulted about it. And the doctors, after diagnosing her and studying her and investigating this, they said that the fact that she is unable to open her fist is not the disease, it's not the illness, that's actually a symptom of a bigger illness. She's got some sort of serious motor neuron disease, and she has various development, and basically their prognosis was that she will not live a normal life. She will have serious learning problems. She will have extreme physical problems, and they also said that based on the diagnosis, she's not going to be able to speak when she gets older. So he said that I requested mulaqat with Hazur. Obviously he wrote to Hazur, but then he requested mulaqat, and he said when she was about 9 months old, he took her, the baby, to see Hazur with the mother. And they explained the whole situation to Hazur and what had happened. And he said that we were so frantic and we were so worried. And Hazur had not a smile on his face, but he just seemed so content and calm. And he just said, he said that Hazur after a few moments said, "Ke fikr na karo, don't worry, bilkul theek hogi. She's going to be completely fine." And he said that moment, he said, I knew that no matter what the doctor said, and again I go back to the fact that he wasn't a very educated person, but his faith in Khilafat in Allah Ta'ala was unshakable. He said, as soon as Hazur said those words, I knew nothing to worry about. And he said, we went home. At that time, the baby was 9 months. He said around 8 or 9 months later, when it was, I guess the baby must have been around 1.5 years, he said, I was with her, and suddenly one day, just completely out of the blue, her hand unclenched. And he said, that moment, he said, it wasn't a surprise for me. He said, of course, it was a moment of great joy. But he said, I knew that moment was coming, because that's what Khalifatul Masih said. And he said that now my daughter, she is 10, 11 years old, and she is completely fine. She speaks well, she is doing well in school. He said he said himself, she's much more educated than I am. And the thing is so again, this is so many stories.
I think we can all relate to that in some respect, that when we go to Hazur Anwar, of course we're going to meet him and to request prayers from him, but sometimes our personal worries overcome us so much that it seems like such a heavy burden. But Hazur's demeanor is so calm and just shows his absolute trust and belief in God and his prayers that they will be answered. And then we see how they're so miraculously answered as well. And we also, even Hazur's been relating the accounts of the companions who participated in the Battle of Badr. We read accounts from the life of the Promised Messiah ﷺ as well, that how sometimes simply from just looking at the person through their blessed gaze, or just by touching the person, they've miraculously been recovered. And we see those, we witness those blessings even today through the blessed institution of Khilafat Ahmadiyya.
Absolutely. Just while you were talking, I remembered another incident which again shows that conviction and trust in Allah that we always see in the Khulafa. Hazur visited America in 2018, and whilst he was there, I met a gentleman, middle-aged, I think he was around 50. He was originally from the Gambia, but he'd moved to America 15, 20 years before. And he told me a very interesting story. He said that some years before, again, it's going around to children being born and stuff, but this story stuck with me as well. He said that when his wife was pregnant, the doctors took some tests, and one day they took them down, and the doctors told them very soberly that unfortunately the test results are not as we would hope, and your baby has marked extremely high on the marker for Down syndrome, and it's almost certain in our view that the child will be born disabled, very severely disabled. And now you have a week to decide if you want to keep the child or if you want to abort it, because the quality of life will not be good. And he said that we were so devastated, and it was such a tough moments, and then obviously they went home, and he said that I said to my wife, we are not going to make this decision. We are going to request the guidance of Hazur, the prayers of Hazur. So he wrote to Hazur, this is a few years ago, 10, 11 years ago. And a couple of days later, they went back to the hospital, had another appointment, and the doctor asked that, do you have an answer yet? And he said that, no, I don't. And the doctor then said, how long? He said, I don't know, it depends on when my Khalifa will guide me. And the doctor, he said, was very indignant when he learned about that he's left this decision to somebody else. He said, I thought you were the father, not the Khalifa. Along those lines, he made a reply. And he said that I said to him very firmly that he is my spiritual leader, he's my spiritual guide. Whatever he decides, I will follow, and I will wait until I get that. So he said that the doctor very indignantly took out his business card and he said, here's my business card, send this to your Khalifa, he can tell me directly what his decision is, along those lines. So he said, I was very hurt and troubled, but I was not going to take any decision without seeking Hazur's guidance. So he said that basically there was one day left when the decision had to be made, and he was praying very fervently that will the child be born, or will they abort the child, or will they keep the child? And he said that that evening finally he got a call from the private secretary's office in London, and he said that the private secretary or whoever was calling from the office said that Hazur has read your letter and Hazur has given this following instruction, that Hazur has said that if you are a sincere Ahmadi, do not abort your child. If you let her live, she will be fine. And he said it was just that one line, but such a powerful line, that do not let your child die if you're a sincere Ahmadi. And if you let her live, she will live and she will thrive. So he said that obviously after that, all fears in terms of what the decision should be, all confusion was vanished. He said the next day was the appointment with the doctor, and we went and we were going to tell him that we are going to keep the child, not abort it. He said we went in, and before I had the chance to say anything, the doctor said, congratulations. He said, I thought it was very strange that why is he congratulating me? Our child has got this condition. And he said that the doctor said that since the last test, we took some more tests of your wife, we did some more scans, and we've realized that our initial diagnosis and pictures were completely wrong. We've looked again, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with your child, and we expect a full, normal and healthy delivery. And he said that, I said to the doctor, he said, what you're telling me is not a surprise. I knew this yesterday. And the doctor said, what do you mean? He said that my Khalifa sent me a message yesterday. And he said, I told him with pride, because I knew how indignant he'd been. He said, he told me yesterday everything is going to be fine. Today you are telling me. And he said that then the doctor, who had been so a little bit arrogant or whatever, he said that his demeanor changed. And he suddenly became very interested. And he said that for me this was a great miracle, just to see the change in the dynamic. And now I was the one who was giving him the lecture and the guidance, and he was really interested to learn about Islam. And he said that for a good half an hour, we talked, and I explained to him the promised Messiah, who the Khulafa were and why. And he said now his attitude was much different. And he said that then, of course, alhamdulillah, the child was born, was well. And again, he told me it had been some years and his daughter was doing wonderfully well. Once I remember in 2016, Hazur visited Sweden. And again, as per his routine, a lot of the days were spent doing mulaqats with Jamaat members. And I remember one of the people who met him was at the time the Sadr Qudam from Finland. He'd come across to Sweden to meet Hazur. And after his mulaqat, he met me, and he was quite emotional and very, very agitated is the wrong word, but he just seemed as though he was having a very, I guess, I mean, the words are emotional. And I figured it was just because he's met Hazur. But he said that it is because, and when I talked to him, he said, I am emotional because I met Hazur, but there's a specific reason why. And so I asked him, he said that a few days before, he had cut his finger and he'd had an accident at home. And he'd cut his finger quite badly. And he said that he, rather than improve, he said over the days, the finger seemed to have got worse. He said that it seemed like it was getting infected. He said it was extremely painful. And he was worried that he wouldn't be able to go for mulaqat and or to travel or to drive. But anyway, he got there, and he said that I just wrapped it up because he said I didn't want Hazur to see my finger, the state of it or anything. So he said I wrapped it up really well, put a really strong bandage on it. And I went into mulaqat. He said I didn't mention it to Hazur, that I had this injury. But I just had those few minutes with Hazur, sought his guidance. He said, as is customary, at the end I had the opportunity to have a photo with Hazur. And he said when the photo, Hazur grabbed his hand, and he said it so happened that Hazur's hand was on that finger that had the bandage on. And he said Hazur grabbed it much tighter than I could ever have imagined. He said, I thought Hazur would just grab it lightly. He said Hazur grabbed my finger very, very hard. And he said it was such that for a few seconds his finger went into excruciating pain. He felt it. And he said it was really, really horrendous. But he said after about 10 seconds, whilst the photo was doing, by the end of the photo, he said the pain had gone. And he said, I knew in that moment something's happened. He said, I couldn't explain it. He said he came out of the mulaqat, and he said he went straight to a private place and he took off the bandage. And he said that injury that had been there, the infection, he said there was no trace of it whatsoever. He said, I was completely stunned. And he was telling me this story, and I think he wanted to double prove. He got out his phone and he said, look, I'm going to show you. And he showed me a photo he'd taken that morning of his finger, and it was a nasty wound. And then he showed me the finger now, and there was nothing there.
Wow.
And it was a very incredible moment. And he said that this is my moment, but this is my moment that I'm going to tell my children. They're going to tell their children. They're going to tell their children. This is the moment that inshallah is going to keep Ahmadiyyat in our family for generations. Because I've seen today the blessings of Khilafat firsthand, and how Allah Ta'ala has that direct connection with him. He said Hazur did not know a thing, but there was something there that has blessed me and healed me. There's so many other stories like this. I remember once in Holland, it was actually just a couple of years ago when Hazur went there in 2019. I met an MD, and he started telling me about how in 2015, on Hazur's previous visit to Holland, he had taken his son for mulaqat. His son at the time I think was 5 or 6, but he'd been born with some sort of genetic illness, and because of this he wasn't able to physically develop, and there was big problems with his bones. He was hunched over, and the doctors had said that this is a type of degenerative disease that is only going to get worse, and eventually probably your son will end up paralyzed. And so obviously, again, it's very troubling for any parent. It's the worst nightmare for any parent to hear this. He said, we went for mulaqat, and of course our burning desire was to request Hazur's prayers for our son, and that was the first thing when we had the opportunity that Hazur, and they told Hazur what the illness was. Hazur listened, and he said that Hazur said, and he said that I was very surprised. Hazur said, kuch nahi ho now, don't worry. एक दो rod लगाएंगे और सब ठीक होगा. That they'll place 1 or 2 rods and then everything will be fine. And he said that it was very strange for me in the sense that we'd been consulting with doctors for years, ever since the child was born. They'd never mentioned the idea of any metal rods, but these were the words that Hazur mentioned. And but Hazur, he said, was very confident that everything will be fine, and that gave us a lot of reassurance that inshallah everything will be okay. And he said that a few weeks later, when we went for our next appointment to the doctor, they were just sitting there, and the doctor said, we've been investigating your son's case further, and we've come to the conclusion that if we place 2 metal rods into his back, I think, he should be able to live a normal life. And he said, as soon as the doctor said the word rods, he said, I knew everything, that this is Allah Ta'ala's and Hazur's words that are coming true. And he said that they did. Straight away I said to the doctor that yes, this is the surgery we want, and without any hesitation, and without any need for any further explanation, he said. I said to the doctor that this is the surgery, this is the way. And he said that then he called over to a boy who was his son, which I didn't know he was playing with some other boys, and he brought him over. And he said that, now look at my son now. He's grown, he was standing straight, he was running around completely fine. He said he's completely fine. He said doctors were really, really impressed that they were hopeful that the surgery would be successful, but they weren't expecting him to develop and to recover at such a rate as he has. And he says this is all, in my view, the blessings of Allah Ta'ala and the prayers and guidance of Khalifatul Masih. And again, I've narrated some incidents, but there's many others as well.
As you mentioned, and all these children, these blessed children and these families, for them, as you've said as well, that will always be a living sign of God, the blessings of Khilafat Ahmadiyya for them and for their progenies to come as well. You quite rightly mentioned that these are just a handful of faith-inspiring accounts, and there's millions of Ahmadis all over the world. And I think each and every person, has these personal experiences with Khilafat, which prove the existence of God and how we as Ahmadis experience the living signs of God through this blessed institution of Khilafat.
I write the diaries which of Huzur's visits and stuff, and sometimes people have asked me that how do you always have enough material to write each time? And the real answer is that my problem always is what to cut out. Because the thing is, I know people aren't going to read hundreds and thousands of pages, but there's so many incidents, so many people's discussions of their own incidents, that every time there's probably about at least as much as I include, I leave out, if not more. Because like you say, everybody has their connection with Khilafat, their stories, and how they have personally been impacted by it.
Jazakallah. Abid, over the years, we've seen Hazur Anwar has been invited to parliaments and international institutes to deliver an address, and we've seen that how even non-Ahmadis are drawn towards the message and the wisdom and guidance that Hazur imparts. And upon the successful completion of the event or even the entire tour, Hazur always reminds the members that this is all owing to the grace and the blessings of Allah the Almighty. You've had the opportunity to travel with Hazur as well officially. Could you just relate some accounts in relation to this, how Allah the Almighty helps and guides Hazur in the preparation of these events and his addresses as well?
Yeah, I mean, with this, I'll tell you one story actually, which certainly reflected to me and was very inspiring to me and also the other people involved about how Allah Ta'ala does guide Hazur. There are many events that Hazur gets invited to address different parliaments. When he goes to different countries, there are a lot of events that he gets asked to participate in. Of course, as many as he can, Hazur does, but there are times when Hazur will send his apologies as well. And even those I've seen, that those events, sometimes where Hazur doesn't attend, you come to realize later on that there were blessings in the non-attendance. And that too is a sign of the connection of Khilafat with Allah. I remember in 2016, Hazur was traveling to Canada for 6 weeks. It was a really jam-packed tour. Throughout the visit, Hazur had engagements in different cities and in different, he addressed universities, parliament. And one of the events that was planned by the Canada Jamaat was for Hazur to visit Quebec, which is the French part of Canada, and to deliver a lecture at the provincial assembly. I think it's called the Quebec Legislative Assembly. And the Canada Jamaat who'd organized this were very excited. It was because that's the one part of Canada where there's less introduction of the Jamaat, and the numbers of MDs in that part of Canada are less compared to the other provinces. And also on a previous tour, they mentioned to me, the local that Hazur had mentioned, that he hopes one day to travel to Quebec. So based on this, they'd done a lot of work, and they had arranged for Hazur, or they'd built up such contacts there that Hazur was invited to address the Quebec Parliament. Now, when the proposal for the 6 weeks was sent to London, of what the itinerary, it goes in advance and then Hazur goes through it. All of the suggested itinerary was approved, except for the 2 or 3 days that were meant to be spent in Quebec. Next to that, there was a big Hazur had crossed. And Hazur said, we're not going to travel, sent a message that we're not going to travel to Quebec. The rest of the plan is approved. And when this message reached the Canada Jamaat, their National Amur-e-Kharja Secretary, he contacted me. And he was a little, I think, disappointed that I think obviously they'd done a lot of work. And he said to me, he said that of course, we will follow whatever Hazur instructs. But it feels somewhat of his words were a missed opportunity. He said that this was really a good opportunity to introduce the Jamaat in this area. And I think obviously he felt the fact that they'd worked hard. I said to him at the time, I said that, look, in every decision of Hazur or the Khalifa Waqt, there are blessings, there is wisdom. Sometimes we don't understand it straight away, but ultimately, eventually, we always do. And so the tour commenced. Everything went, alhamdulillah, very well. A few weeks into the tour, the same person, the National Amur-e Kharja Secretary, he's a friend of mine as well, he came to my room where I was staying. And he was very animated. He said that, I need to tell you something. I said, what is it? He said, thank God we didn't go to Quebec. And I said, what do you mean? He said that it's been all over the news yesterday and today that one of the members of the Quebec Assembly, basically they're members of Parliament, has been involved in a very serious personal scandal, criminal, and he's had to resign, and the police are investigating him over something, and it wasn't a pleasant story. I don't want to go into the details here. But he said that that was the MP that we made contact with. And he was the person who had officially invited Hazur. And this visit would have taken place a few days ago. And the whole media would have covered it, and there would have been photos of Hazur and the Jamaat with this politician. And it would not have reflected well on Hazur, it wouldn't have reflected well on the Jamaat. And he said that now, thank God that we didn't go through. And he said, I mean, he was just very clear that this, from an objective point of view, would have been very, very terrible. And he asked me, he said that, please, can you narrate this to Hazur and let him know that beforehand, I was confused. And now I've seen the truth and the reasons and the blessings. And afterwards, I did narrate it to Hazur. And Hazur said that this is how Allah Ta'ala protects the honor and dignity of Khilafat. And it's so true that Hazur didn't know the ins and outs of the politicians in Quebec. They just sent a program saying, in Quebec. They hadn't mentioned at that time which MP was hosting it or how it had been arranged. But just something in Allah Ta'ala's, in Hazur's heart, inspired by God Almighty, that he didn't have that contentment. And that saved the Jamaat from a great trial.
Absolutely. And we see that the 113 years since the establishment of Khilafat Ahmadiyya, each and every day of it is a testimony to this. That how Allah the Almighty grants His support and guidance and safeguards the honor and dignity of Khalifatul Masih. Abid Sahab, you mentioned that you've met many Ahmadis across the world as well, and nowadays we see that Hazur, there's the opportunity of people to meet beloved Hazur through virtual mulaqats and online meetings. But for sometimes people have this longing to see Hazur, to meet Hazur. There's millions of Ahmadis all over the world who've never had the opportunity to meet Hazur. And it's perhaps sometimes meeting Hazur for them is an answer to their lifelong prayers. Is there anything that you could relate in regard to that, where someone's met Hazur perhaps for the first time, or perhaps had a deep anguish, longing in their heart to be able to see Hazur, or even to speak to him or have musafa with him?
There's an incident that comes to my mind, just the way you mentioned about that longing. There's an MD who lives in Scotland, Ahmed Gunadu Sahab. He's quite well known. He's Ghanaian. I'm sure a lot of our viewers will
a good friend
have
seen everyone
him.
Here in the UK.
And he has a photo on his WhatsApp status of Hazur holding his arm very lovingly. And for a long time, or I should say several times, I asked him that, when is that photo from? And just on text message, I think, or perhaps once when I met him. And he was giving me the cagey answer, and being the person who writes diaries and stuff, that just made me more interested. And so then I asked him again, I said one time, I said that, when was that photo taken? It's such a beautiful photo. And then he said, Abid Sahab, lots of people, I can't recall how many have asked me about this photo, and I've never told anybody the true story, but I'm going to tell it to you, and if you want to share it, feel free. And so with that permission, I'll share it here as well. He said that he'd been regional Qaid of Scotland region in Khudam al-Ahmadiyya for 7 or 8 years. And he said that it had always been his intention to lead by example, at least as much as he could. And so he said for that reason, every morning he would go to the mosque for Fajr and in the evening for Isha, and he would take his children. And he would try to be involved in every single Jamaat event and try to facilitate so that he could at least say about himself that he was seeking to set an example for other Khudam. And he said that during that time they had good performance as Khudam al-Ahmadiyya, but they never reached that standard where they were able to achieve the Alme-Nami at Ijtima. And he said that as this was now his last, is a few years ago, I think it was 2015, he said it was his last Ijtima as a Khadim. He was progressing to Ansar, and so he would no longer be the regional Qaid. He said that he felt very sorry that he'd never had the opportunity to receive that blessed Musafa, to be able to shake Hazur's hand on the stage and to receive an award from Hazur for as regional Qaid. And so he said that those 2-3 days of Ijtima, every night he would wake up for the Tahajjud, and he said, I would just weep before God Almighty. And he said that I would pray to Allah Ta'ala that if there's even anything I did in these 7-8 years as regional Qaid that was pleasing to you, please give me the opportunity to shake the hand of my Khalifa at least once before I graduate to Ansar and at this Ijtima. And he said that I opened my heart before Allah Ta'ala, but I didn't mention this hope of mine to a single soul. He said, even my family would not know that this was my deepest desire at that time of that Ijtima, to have this one chance to meet Hazur at the Ijtima before he became an Ansar. And he said that the 3 days of the Ijtima came and went. And he said that Hazur's concluding session, the final dua, everything was complete. And he said that now was the time for his region to pack up their stuff and to head back on the coach to Scotland for the long journey. And he said that after that, he said he was feeling very dejected, that he'd been praying and hoping, and he prayed with such sincerity that he had some hope, but now is the end, there's no chance now. He said that just as he was putting his stuff in the van and all the other Khudam who were going to head back were seated in the bus, he said somebody shouted from a distance that Hazur is doing a round, come. And so he said he looked and he saw that there was a huge crowd, and so obviously he ran towards the crowd, and Hazur was inspecting the site. And he said that still, because there were so many people around Hazur, he couldn't get close, but just to be near, that proximity, that was enough, and he felt shy. And he said that suddenly somebody said to him that Hazur is calling you, Kanadu Sahib, Hazur is calling you. And he said that I couldn't hear Hazur because it was such a distance. But so he said, I just ran and made my way and got to Hazur. And he said that Hazur looked at him and smiled, and he said, Kanadu Sahib, I think you are turning Ansar, is that correct? And he said, I was just completely stunned at this. And this is, I mean, the whole basis of his prayers was the fact that he was turning into, he was graduating to Ansar. And he said that, I do not even understand, I did not know how Hazur would have this knowledge. And then he said, Hazur joked with him, he said the Ghanaians and the Africans, they don't like going into Ansar, and they try to delay it as long as possible. And he said, with this I started laughing, and Hazur laughed, and the people around who could hear were all enjoying it. And he said, at that moment then Hazur extended his hand towards me, and I had the chance to come and do Musafa. And he said, not just that, he said after that then Hazur very lovingly grabbed his arm, and he said Hazur held it for a few seconds, for perhaps a minute or two, and he said it was at that moment somebody had taken a photo. And he said, Abid Sahib, that is the photo that you have been watching. And that was the moment that will stay with me forever, of how Allah Ta'ala understood and heard my prayers in the middle of the night. And it was such a beautiful incident in the way he narrated it as well.
I think many people have his number on their WhatsApp. Now they can look at that picture and relate to that.
And relate to it and understand the story.
The significance is and how blessed that opportunity was. And it was, again, a sign of Allah the Almighty's, how He accepts our prayers, and how this relationship that we have with Khilafat is no ordinary relationship, but it's a truly spiritual one. And talking about spirituality, Abid, as Ahmadis, it's our firm belief that Allah the Almighty communicates to His servants, whether it be through the acceptance of our prayers, as you've just related, a very faith-inspiring account, but also through dreams and visions, true dreams. I recall once there was an incident that you mentioned in one of your diaries. If you could share it for our viewers as well, where I believe it was a non-Ahmadi who actually experienced a true dream in relation to Khilafat Ahmadiyya. If you could just share
I think that the incident you're referring to, it was a few years ago. Hazur was on a visit to Germany, and during most of his visits to Germany, there were mosque openings. There were, mashallah, very active Jamaat in building mosques. And there was a mosque opening, and as per the routine, the local Jamaat had not just invited prominent local dignitaries, but also the neighbours as well, who were local to the area. And so they had invited all the neighbours. And Hazur came and delivered an address. And just before after that there was a meal, and then as Hazur was leaving and coming down from the stage, there was a Murabbi who's I think he's graduated from the UK Jamia, but he lives and serves in Germany. And he had a non-Ahmadi lady stood next to him. She was a Bosnian lady, and I could see that she seemed quite emotional, nervous. Something wasn't quite right, and so then the Murabbi, he himself was quite nervous approaching Hazur unexpectedly, but he plucked up the courage and he moved forward, and Hazur saw him, and Hazur asked him that what is the reason that you're approaching me? And he said, Hazur, this lady is desperate to see you. She's a neighbor of the mosque. She came here. We had invited all the neighbors. We don't have any existing or pre-existing connection with her or meetings with her, but as soon as she saw you, she said she had to meet you. So then Hazur straight away turned to the lady and he said, Assalamu alaikum, and he asked how she was. And then upon that, straight away she started narrating that she had seen a dream 2.5 years before, and she said that in that dream I saw a person who was very dignified, very beautiful, who was wearing a turban, a pagri, a white turban, and had a quite lengthy beard. And she said, I'd never seen that person in my life before, but I knew that there was something right and good and pure about that person, and I felt very good when I woke up from that dream. And she said, ever since I've been wondering and waiting if I will ever find out who that person is. And she said, today when I was seated at the table, I came as an ordinary guest with no knowledge of Jamaat Ahmadiyya. She said, when you walked in, I saw you were the person who had been in my dreams of that 2 years ago. And she said, ever since then I had to meet you, I had to speak to you and request for your prayers. And upon this, Hazur's style is very, very humble, always. Hazur just said, prayed for her, and I remember that, and I say that in the sense that Hazur doesn't like any sort of praise for him, and whether it's whereas for this lady now, you could see that she considered Hazur so great because she'd seen him and had been very faith affirming. But Hazur just prayed for her. He said that I'm happy that you were able to see this dream, and I pray that may Allah Ta'ala enable you to be guided, rightly guided, and to have true faith and true belief in the Prophet Messiah alayhi salam. And Hazur prayed for her, gave us some more advice, and then Hazur departed. But for all of us who were there, it was a very unique and special moment about how this person who had absolutely no contact with Ahmadiyyat, had no knowledge of it, but somehow Allah Ta'ala had, you sometimes in the past, I had heard of stories like this as well, but this was the first time I'd witnessed it, perhaps with my own eyes, about how somebody with absolutely no knowledge or connection with the Jamaat, how they had been guided towards the truth of Khilafat through a true dream.
And it just, for me personally, this is perhaps one of the most convincing arguments of not only the existence of Allah the Almighty, but the truthfulness of the promised Messiah والسلام, and the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, that how Allah the Almighty Himself guides people, instills the love for Khilafat and Ahmadiyyat in people's hearts. The promised Messiah والسلام, had mentioned as well that this is the duty, the job of Allah, that He is the one who instills the love and draws people towards Islam and Ahmadiyyat. Obviously, we're fast approaching, towards the end of what's proving to be a very, very faith-inspiring segment for us. In regards to Hazur's wisdom, the guidance he receives from Allah the Almighty at every step, at every stage of his life, I just wanted to discuss one aspect, was with regards to the very unfortunate incident that happened last year of the killing of George Floyd. And after that we saw a lot of civil unrest in America and other parts of the world as well, but particularly in America. And we even saw headlines where they had mentioned specifically of a civil war. But if you could just sort of share some insight into that, because this is something that Hazur Anwar had actually, you can say, foretold many, many years before in a very famous interview.
Yeah, I'm sure many of the viewers will have seen that clip from Canada of Hazur mentioning the word civil war in relation to the United States. Just to give a little bit of context, during that tour, Hazur had it was 2016, and it was Hazur was visiting Canada, and there was a lot of media coverage throughout the tour. But the Canada press team who were working and serving, they really, really hoped that they would be able to arrange an interview with Peter Mansbridge, because he was considered and is considered the most foremost Canadian journalist, and one of the ones who for decades and decades had been covering, and all their biggest events, it would always be him who would be the anchor. And he had a program where he would interview very famous world leaders. And when they told him and informed him that Hazur was visiting Canada, he was immediately very interested and said, I would love to come and do an interview with His Holiness. And so the interview was arranged. It was held in the Beth al-Islam Mosque in Toronto, in Peace Village. And towards the end of the interview, Hazur was asked by the journalist, by Peter Mansbridge, about the forthcoming election in America, which was the presidential election where Donald Trump was going to stand against Hillary Clinton. And Donald Trump had said a lot of incendiary things during the election about Muslims, about people of different races, about Mexicans. And so he asked Hazur's opinion about this, and what would be the consequences of a Donald Trump presidency. And Hazur's answer, which as I say many people will have seen, was that if he tries to enact those types of policies that instead of bringing people together ignites division, then I can see that there will be a state of civil war. And it was something that on the sidelines where I was stood and a couple of other people, even we took a step back, figuratively anyway, that civil war, even to me at that time, it seemed like something for the 19th century of America, not something for the 21st century. And the journalist was so experienced, and for him as well, you could see in that moment, he wanted to ask, he was surprised and he asked Hazur, civil war, as in, have you misspoken? And Hazur said, yes. If these types of policies are made that would foster so much division, then yes, there could be such a situation when those types of tensions re-emerge. And being a journalist, of course, that was something that the journalist as well, when he broadcast the interview, he made sure that clip was in. And I'm glad he did. But anyway, quite a few MDs at the time who I was in contact with, as well as other people, they would sometimes come up to me and ask me that, did Hazur mean civil war? Did he mean those types of things? And anyway, but soon then, of course, President Trump, he became President Trump, he was elected. And during the 4 years, I don't want to go into a commentary on Donald Trump's presidency, but there were a series of policies and stuff that weren't really harmonious to the peace, and which did seem to try to, or did seem to discriminate against minorities or people of different races, leading up to the what you mentioned, George Floyd last year, and how there was so much and so many racial tensions ignited by that. And then I guess you could say it culminated earlier this year on January 6th, when after losing the next election, the President Trump was claiming that he had actually won it, and thousands of his supporters stormed the Capitol Hill building in a way not seen for 150 years, since around that time of the Civil War in America. And so across those 4 years, there was so much disharmony, so much division ignited, that now, and I read the media news coverage and stuff about politics, I've lost count of the number of times that people have, in the last 2-3 years, referred to the possibility of a civil war in America, or of it being civil war-like, or the prospect of an actual civil war. And now people aren't saying it with shock or a state of that how is this possible? Rather, they have a fear that this is something that is possible. And I remember 2-3 years after I narrated 1 or 2 of these stories to Hazur about how other people are now starting to mention about the fact that there is a risk of civil war-like situation in America. And I was very struck by Hazur's answer. Hazur said to me at the time, he said that when I said the word civil war, it was a surprise to me as well, in some respect. It was not something that I had thought about in the past, before the interview, that there could be a civil war in America. But he said at that moment, Allah Ta'ala put it in my heart that these are the words to use. And he said, now the worldly people, or the people, the commentators and stuff, they are also coming to this similar conclusion. And so, again, this is one of the great lessons that I've learned, just as we wrap up in my times, that especially for Ahmadis, but also for other people as well, but certainly for Ahmadis, that we may not always understand instantly the message or the instruction of Khilafat al-Masih, or the reasons of why he has said something. But with time, if you show obedience and you are patient, you will always, always see the truth to his words, and to see how he truly is a shield for the believers. And if we stay behind him, if we follow him, we are obedient to him, then inshallah that we will be amongst those who are protected. But people who take the different route, God forbid, those are the people who will suffer the consequences. So anyway, I think that's a good place, and I just want to thank you as well for this opportunity.
Abid, Jazakallah for taking your time out, joining us here, and relating truly fascinating and faith-inspiring accounts of how we experience God, and this is something that all Ahmadis all over the world can relate to through the blessed institution of Khilafat. And if there's one message that I personally take away from this very insightful discussion that we had, is that no matter who you are and no matter where you are, if you're earnestly and sincerely trying to strive in your relationship and establishing a connection and a bond with Khilafat Ahmadiyya, everyone can partake of these blessings and witness these miraculous signs of Allah the Almighty and His blessings through the institution of Khilafat. And as you quite rightly said, that it is up to us to attach ourselves with Khilafat with utmost loyalty and obedience. Abid Sahab, Jazakallah once again, and Jazakallah to all our viewers who have tuned in to the first International God Summit. From all of us here, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.